Greetings, students. I'm Dr. Sadri, your instructor for this International Political Economy course. And what we are going to do today is we are going to focus on Module 3. As you know, the previous modules, we covered two of the mainstream, theories of international political economy, or better to say, for short, what do we call it? IPE, is that right? And now, today, we are going to focus on structuralism, is that right? Structuralism is a very large perspective that includes a lot of other isms, I'm sure you have heard about Marxism, some of you have heard about Leninism, Stalinism, Maoism, Castroism, etc., etc. Is that right? All of these, isms which are a part of the Marxist body of, theories are going to fit under what? Structuralism. And I will tell you why that is the case in a few minutes. So as you can see, we are, focusing on Module 3, Structuralism, is that right? And structuralist perspective. For this one, I just made sure that you have only one chapter because the material sometimes is heavy. Some parts of the chapter is easier to digest. Some part of it is a little bit heavier. I'm going to try to focus on helping you with the hardest part of it, and there are some areas that I think the authors, they assume that everybody knows and not everybody does, and I have given them comments about this thing, and this is supposed to be the best text in IPE, as of now. So anyway, as you can see, I've also, to help you, I've provided, summaries and outline and everything, and I included only one article because I thought between the point of view of this article by Sanchez and then, our authors, you have already at least two different perspectives to compare and contrast with, because I never want my student to have limited view and subscribe to only one perspective, because as you know, in our field, one perspective doesn't solve all of the problems. Is that right? We need to have at least compare and contrast it to at least one or two others. Okay, so having said that one, let's start with what? With our, lecture on this one. So as you can see, the lecture shows that we have gone beyond our typical 5-point scale, what do you call it, outline and everything. And the reason is because some of the material were a little bit on the heavier side, so I decided to separate them. I could have actually put this one into a 5-point scale, and I usually do that for the grad students and everything, but I thought for the undergrads, to open it up a little bit, and then the areas which are easier, we go a little bit faster on that, and the areas that are harder, I'm going to explain a little bit more, because basically that's my job right here anyway. So we start with an introduction, that you can call it overview, background, whatever. Then we talk about elements of Marxist perspective. Then we talk about Marxism in contemporary, contemporary view. And then we talk about Marx and culture. And then Lenin, Vladimir Lenin and international relation and the notion of imperialism, the world system and dependency theories, which are also connected to these group of theories, and then we talk about intellectual hegemony, and then structuralism and modern society, and last but not least, with what we conclude. Okay, so having said that one, let's start with our very first slide. Truly, there is no substitute for water. Okay, here we go. Introduction, structuralism. What is the nature of it? Well, the nature of, and I put Chiapas over there because sometimes some version of your text, either the e-book part of it or the paper version of it, sometimes they include this case or not. Look, the very first thing I should let you know is this. We're not trying to make you a Marxist or a structuralist or anything. It's just important for you to know that this exists. And believe it or not, this theory as a major criticism of what we covered before, which was what classical liberalism, nowadays known as what capitalism or whatever, it provides one of the most effective, criticism. Now, this doesn't mean that capitalism or classical liberalism, is wrong, and this doesn't make also these guys completely right. Is that right? But these are basically, for all practical purposes, a lot of opposing ideas, and you should, as a new generation, know these things because we are passing the torch to you. Is that right? And then as you would be more familiar with all these different theories and ideas, those of you, of course, many of you are going to go and, work for businesses or nonprofits or others, but those of you who decide to stay in academia and everything, you're going to synthesize all these ideas, and hopefully you're going to come up with your own ideas, and ideas that others are going to cite and report and everything else. And that's how science grows. Is that right? By the way, we are very proud of those of you who go to work for business and nonprofits. There's nothing wrong with that, because you guys are going to get practical experience in the field. All right? Okay, having said that one is, so the first thing you need to know, and a lot of students that have asked me, Dr. Sadri, after the demise of Soviet Union and everything else, why do we have to even worry about Marxism and structuralism? You're absolutely right. Marx is dead. He has been dead for more than a century. Is that right? And a couple of centuries actually right now. But, Marxism and structuralism is still alive. Okay? And it has impacted all the other theories as well. Now, yes, it has had a failure. And we're going to talk about the Russian case and everything, why it has happened over there. But it has had some impact. The people who were in policy positions and they understood what could happen when capitalism is completely free and it functions the way it wanted to. It can cause some social challenges that 19th century and the 20th century and then now 21st century cannot take it. Is that right? Notice right now in the 21st century we have policies that our government, one of the most capitalistic countries on the planet, has, that really doesn't exist in what basically in any kind of classical liberalism, like social security. Is that right? We were one of the last industrial states that came up with the idea of social security in 1935. I know this is way before any of us were born, including myself. Is that right? But having said that one, we end up having it because the society is trying to protect that generation that, committed itself to the society, contributed tremendously to the growth of the society, and now is too old and needs help. Is that right? That, Medicare, Medicaid, opportunity to be a member of a union, opportunity to do this, opportunity to do that, retirement notions, vacations, all of these things. These are not ideas coming from, classical liberalism, or capitalism, okay? So these are all ideas that came in as a result of the impact of what, structuralism theories on those. So having said that one, yes, Marx is dead, but Marxism and many of the ideas are still alive and still impacting our life nowadays in the 21st century. And it's going to impact your life as well, okay? So structuralism, the nature of it, we already discussed that. Why do they call it structuralism? Because if you remember in classical liberalism, the unit of analysis was an individual. In the what? Mercantilism, the unit of analysis was the state. Okay? In structuralism, the unit of analysis is the unit. Okay? So they think changes happen depending on what type of structure you have. You have a friendly structure, things are going to be friendly for people. You have an unfriendly structure, the things are going to be unfriendly for the what? For the people. So structure changes behavior, as opposed to individual changes the behavior or state changes the behavior. You see what I mean? The previous perspective. So that's the main point of it. So the definition of it, as you know, I'm not too particular about the definition. The book gives some definitions, and then, the author, it just comes out with some other ideas. As long as you kind of define it in a, generally speaking, I would be happy with that one. So I'm not going to give you my own definition or something, but I would agree with that. And of course, we're going to talk about different types of structuralism. So having said that one, now let's go to the first main one. So here in the main one, we are focusing the elements of what Marxist, perspective. So in that regard, there are a few things that we need to consider. Number one, the history. Number two, the notion of class struggle. And number three, crisis of capitalism. In terms of the history, the Marxist structuralists, they usually look at history as like a dynamic process that have been changing throughout human history. Is that right? And they focus on historical materialism because they think that from the beginning of the social systems, individuals have been looking for some materialistic satisfaction in their life. Okay, so historical materialism. In that regard, they're also talking about, because of that historical materialism, economic sector of the state acts as the foundation of that society. So if you want to bring a change to a society, according to these guys, is that right? You need to change the economic mode of production. So you change that one, you change the up. So in other words, economy is like the basement, and over that basement is the first floor, like political, and then culture and everything else goes just, higher floors. You see what I mean? But you know better, is that right? We don't have to be a, civil engineer to know that one, that no building could last if the foundation of it, which in this case, according to these guys, is the economy, is not strong enough. Is that right? So that's very important to remember. All right, so having said that one, what else should we focus on? A key concept for these people is what? A class struggle. And this is actually one of the invention of Marx, okay? When we talked about, for example, Kenneth Walt's, idea, is that right, that 3 levels of analysis. Remember module 0, is that right? So 3 levels of analysis, international relation. We either focus on the behavior of individual. Who are these individuals? Individuals like presidents, like, Secretary of States, which in this country we call, in most other countries they call Minister of Foreign Affairs, is that right? Or other very, very powerful individuals, is that right? When we are focused on an individual, we call it individual level of analysis. In other words, the behavior of this one individual impacts the foreign policy of the country. Then the next level would be, state level. So we say U.S. foreign policy, Russian foreign policy, Chinese foreign policy, Zimbabwean foreign policy, Brazil foreign policy, Israel foreign policy, Iran's foreign policy. Why do we say that? It's because that state, it makes that foreign policy. It's not the result of the behavior of one individual, okay? So there are some very, very powerful individuals, but others, they contribute to it, and then they come up with a policy. And then the third level, if you remember, an international relation was what we call system level, which, if you remember again in module 0, we mentioned that one as one of the third areas that international relation focuses on, and that would be how behavior happens at the system. Like, for example, levels of hunger in the world. Is that right? It's not focusing on one particular country. Levels of hunger, levels of unemployment, levels of inflation, levels of this, levels of that, climate change, this, that, etc., etc. These are all at the system level. Now, you could subdivide it into regional and global, but still system level. That makes sense? Okay. In that regard, Marx's contribution was, he said, let's go inside the state, and inside every state, he saw always a struggle between two groups of people, okay? In simple terms, we can call them rich and poor, is that right? When you read Marxist, works, they use the, fancy French word bourgeoisie for rich and proletariat for what? For poor. Or upper and upper class and low class. Now remember, when he was talking about these things, the society was not so sophisticated to have a really large middle class or anything. So 5% of the society was rich, 95% were poor. Okay, and that's how he saw this struggle happening. So the class struggle, which leads into a new levels of analysis that they suggest class analysis. So you can put the class analysis between individual and state, is that right? Individual, class analysis, state, and system, and everything else. So that's one of the major contribution, and he saw it, throughout human history. So analyzing history in terms of struggle, okay, that's one. And then the bourgeoisie and the proletariat that I already told you, is that right? And then competition causes rich to exploit poor. So competition among different groups and everything else, it's, according to Marx, leads, the rich people to what? To exploit the poor. Now, remember, this word, exploit, if you read it somewhere, this is a terminology that Marxist structurists, they use, okay? No, respectful capitalists would ever say that, okay? They would just talk about cooperation, collaboration, things like that, because this has a very negative connotation. Is that right? Okay. And then, of course, Marx, contrary to what Soviet Union was doing, was trying to do this and do that and attack this or attack that or do whatever else or influence others, Marx was remember, he was a Jewish scholar born and raised in Germany, one of the top 3 most industrial countries in Europe, Germany, France, and UK. Is that right? So he was actually not suggesting that there should be, I mean, he talked about dictatorship of proletariat, but he thought there's going to be a political party, they're going to vote. He still was thinking like a Western scholar. He wasn't thinking like, oh yes, we are authoritarian and we're going to kill people and we're going to create something called KGB, secret police, and if you say the smallest little, criticism, bring it, to the public, we're going to catch you, we're going to take you, we're going to torture you, we're going to do 1,000 different things with your body and then throw you somewhere that nobody can find. He never said stuff like that. Is that right? It was the authoritarian nature of states like Russia, is that right, which was the least developed, country basically in Europe, for God's sake, except having an army, is that right? And then China later on, and then other places like that. Their authoritarian nature because their political system was not developed, and this is a challenge that you need as students to know, that there is economic development that usually happens pretty quickly. You can build roads, this, that, airport, whatever, you can build whatever. But political development, which is educating your people and then also educating you have the, laws in the country that you follow, as opposed to somebody says, oh, I'm telling everybody to turn right and everybody turns right and the only person that turns left is going to be captured by the secret police or something. What type of, political development is that? We tolerate listening to a lot of stuff that we do not necessarily agree, because that's the essence of our political development. Anyway, so Marx thought you don't need to do anything to the capitalistic societies because because capitalism, according to Marx, has the seeds of its own destruction inside. And this seed is going to grow, so you don't have to do it. You just have to wait until the capitalistic countries fall apart. That was his idea. Okay? Now, here we go. What are the three laws, And then here, they call it the three laws of falling rate, One is the, falling rate of profit. Is that right? Because there's so much competition, even among the capitalist, states and everything, and, between capitalist, classes or something. So the profit is going to come, but it's going to keep coming down. Of course, they're talking about disproportionately, and then, concentration of the, power and everything, which is also very important. And as I mentioned, the seeds of destruction. So the three elements are right here. The three laws of falling rate of profit, disproportionality, and concentration. Concentration of what? Concentration of power. Is that right? So, and as I mentioned, it's talking about the seeds of destruction, competition, unevenness, instability, alienation, causes, a falling what? And final what? Revolution. So I kind of, that we always look at our PowerPoint as well, our study guide. So I put a lot of ideas right here to organize it for you. I'm not going to go to the details. I'm not going to insult your intelligence. Okay, so here we go. Next notion. Marxism in a contemporary view. So the competition part of it is, it's basically for a mercantilist, it's a zero-sum game. So in some ways, they agree with some aspect of what Marx says, that, the world is a kind of place for a struggle and everything else. And, of course, the mercantilists, they want, zero-sum game. They want to be always the winner and somebody else to be a complete loser. Is that right? For the liberals, which have a positive-sum game, this is the most troublesome because they have a positive image, very optimistic, and they see themselves in complete contradiction with what? With the structurists. And for Marxists or structurists, all parties are losing. So those guys, they think everybody can win a little bit. Marxists, they think, everybody's going to be losing. And the mercantilists, they want to be just on the, winning side, and everybody else should be losing. The second notion that we need to talk about is market. Like the liberals, a competition system with, many buyers and many sellers. Is that right? They accept that part of it, okay? So it's not completely different. But in terms of the summaries, we can say that economic and, economy is very, very important for them. It's because the base. Class struggle is the significant key issues, and also what? Exploitation, as you can imagine. So here we go. Marx and culture. People, they usually see Marx as somebody who just talked about, economy and politics. Is that right? But in the reality of it, there is a culture dimension of it, artistic dimension of it. You can go and Google and see, for example, some of the Marxist, artists, and many of them obviously were from Soviet Union and other Eastern European countries when they were still under the influence of the Marxist perspective, the Chinese or others. Okay, so Marx, and Marxism is not limited to the economy, but also the entire society. Well, entire society includes also culture. Okay. He didn't think culture is the base of the society. He thought culture is above, economy is the foundation. But here, the whole notion of superficiality of the activities versus structure. So Marx was looking at this culture as superficial because what really makes a difference is that foundation, that economic aspect. And then Marx's cultural analysis, applies to, here we go. That would make a nice short answer, isn't it? Short answer question. If I say, for example, according to the Marxist, the cultural analysis, applies to what three elements? Arts, literature, film. Okay? So here we go. You can Google those and find examples, and the text talks about it anyway. All right. So Lenin. What is the first contribution of Lenin? So after Marx, the very first person we are thinking about is what? How Lenin did something or didn't do whatever. Well, one of the interesting things about Marx you should know is Marx looked at each one of these highly industrial countries. He first of all started looking at his own country, Germany, is that right? And then when he started expressing himself, they kick him out of his own country. So he went to France. And then he started doing the same type of thing as a scholar. They kick him out of there. He went to UK. And over there he had a friend, Engels and everything. They did some work together. Actually, Engels was a capitalist, but he was also an intellectual. So they were, tolerating each other, and they became, collaborators and thinkers and everything else. But Marx was not thinking in terms of like international relations. You see what I mean? And that type of thinking in terms of how Marxism applies to international relations really comes from Lenin. Okay, so that's why I put Lenin, international relation and imperialism. So one of the things that Lenin had to answer was, wait a minute, Marx was talking about there's going to be a crisis of capitalism. So Germany, France, and UK are supposed to go to, because they were the most industrial countries at the time. Is that right? They're supposed to go to this type of revolution. How come that revolution is not happening? Was Marx wrong? Did he make a mistake? So the crisis of capitalism, according to Lenin and his writing, was what delayed by imperialism. Because those countries, many of the European countries, doesn't matter, the big ones or the smaller ones, they end up going to Asia, Africa, Latin America, and they colonize those, people there. Is that right? And sometimes they were not even states there. Sometimes there were some older states there, like states like, Egypt, Iran, China, whatever. But in many other parts of the world, there were not states. There were a lot of tribes running around, and then they carved things, and they looked at the geography of it. Oh, yeah, this mountain looks like a pretty good, thing. So they kind of all artificial borders, artificial this, what? For colonial purposes. Why? Because going outside was providing it with natural resources and cheap or free labor. If they were able to enslave those people, if they were African, if they were Asian, if they were Latin American. Look at what the Spaniards and the Portuguese, we're not saying anything bad about them. This is the reality of it. Is that right? Well, look at what they did with what? With, for example, in Latin America. Is that right? So they went over there, basically, killed, the natives, and they discovered Americas. Okay, all right? Well, I come to your home and in your pocket, I discover money, you see? So they basically took that stuff out, and then, supposedly they made them Christian or whatever, but in reality, they were emptying all their, pockets from gold and silver and everything, other valuable things that they had. So here we go. According to Lenin, that's why those countries, they didn't have that revolution that Marx was suggesting. Is that right? Because it was delayed, okay? So Marx's laws of the capitalism was turned outward with Lenin, so he started thinking more internationally. All right. So the production and the finance structures were also very important. At that time when Marx was, around, people were, focusing on basically what? Production, okay? Goods. Not even services, mostly goods, okay? By the time Lenin comes about, they're thinking not just about goods, but also banking, finances, you know what I mean? Those type of things. So he adds those stuff to it. And then the growth of the monopolies, leads into imperialism. Look, according to pure capitalism, there's nothing wrong with monopolies. Is that right? If you're smart enough to come up with an idea that can capture a significant percentage of the market, it's absolutely okay. Here we go. These type of perspective led the U.S. Congress to come up with antitrust laws. Is that right? one of the, one of the victims of that end up being what? Mr., the owner of the Standard Oil. Is that right? Mr. Rockefeller Sr. Mr. Rockefeller Sr. was called into the Congress, and he said, well, look, you have been buying all those other independent oil companies and you have created this giant. This monopoly cannot last. He got lawyers. He tried to defend. He said, well, that's based on notion of capitalism. The members of Congress were not agreeing with that one. I'm not suggesting they were Marxists, but I'm just trying to tell you how this one affected them. Is that right? Because in pure capitalism, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. What did they do to Standard Oil Company? Divided into like 10 different companies. Is that right? Some of them, they still survived nowadays, like Chevron, Exxon, Mobil, Texaco, those type of things that you see everywhere else. Some of them, they didn't as much, or they got absorbed with others, So it's kind of very interesting. Is that right? By the way, to bring that type of discussion from that time period of the, 20th century to 21st century, guess what? In the 21st century, Mr. Gates and his Microsoft had the same experience. Is that right? When government discovered that, oh my gosh, you buy a computer and nowadays our society cannot work without computers, the operating system basically is Microsoft. Is that right? So, other than the Apple products at the time that it was competing with them, is that right? Microsoft had like, what, 80, 85, something like that, percentage of the market? Well, from a U.S. perspective, U.S. government perspective, that's dangerous. That gives too much power to one corporation. So what did they do? He got all these fancy lawyers and everything. They wanted to divide them to like 3 different companies. Is that right? They end up basically dividing it into 2 companies. Okay? So these are something that what happens. Again, it's a result of that type of thinking. Okay, so growth of monopolies, we talked about imperialism delayed but not avoided that crisis. That's something else. So Lenin talks about that one. And capitalistic world, not develop, did not help to develop really developing countries according to Lenin's. Why? Because they were under what? All that pressure and everything else. So in fact, some people, they think really capitalism doesn't help countries develop. And this is one of the areas that you can criticize them, because then you can talk about countries like what we call baby tigers, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore. How the heck did they grow? Is that right? They were supposed to be, according to some people, it's not politically correct terminology, but they call them, oh, these are basket cases. I don't like to call anybody basket case. Okay, maybe they are behind, but basket case, it just sounds so negative. Anyway, so they said these are basket cases. Okay, if these are basket cases, how come they became baby tigers and, their economy is a part of the global economy? And look at, just look at Korea, is that right? Look at Korean products wonderfully, competing with a lot of sophisticated products from Europe, Japan, and everywhere else in the U.S. market, and the U.S. product in the U.S. market. Is that right? Hyundai and Kia, and look at their electronics. Galaxy. What is that? Samsung and LG and everything. You see, so it's not a lost cause if the leaders of a country make some tough decisions and everything. So applying Marxism with the finance and international relation and the North-South are some of the contribution of what? Lenin. Okay, let's go to the next one. So what are some of the other modern theories that are kind of associated with structuralism, Marxism? Two of the most important one is the word system, and the other one is dependency. Dependency theory really comes from the scholars of Latin American studies, okay? Because they discovered that among the developing countries in the world in the earlier 20th century, the developing countries in Latin America, they were among the first one that they got their independence, and they felt like, oh, we have our political independence. We have paid somebody to write us a national anthem, and we have a flag. Oh, so we are not, and there are no foreign soldiers in our Spanish or Portuguese or whatever, so soldiers in our country or something. So we are independent. Then they notice, oh my God, economically we still are dependent on what? Former colonial power. Okay, so then they started coming up with the whole notion of dependency theory, which means that politically you can feel that you are free, but economically you're still stuck. Okay, what are you going to do? And then we are going to talk more about this one later. So world system was looking at that one at the at a system level, a global level, not just relationship between two states at a time. Is that right? Was thinking at the global level, it seemed like the same way that the societies are developing a new class, middle class. Is that right? At the global level, we have core, countries, the most industrial countries, periphery countries, what some people call the basket cases, which is not an appropriate terminology, basically developing countries, and then some that they are between the two, like the middle class at the international level. Those are called semi-periphery. So let me give you an example. Like for example, Germany, is that right? Produces like what? Very fine automobile, Volkswagen, is that right? Establishes an assembly line in Brazil, which by the way, this is a real example, so I'm not making it up, is that right? In Brazil, and then the Brazilian manufacturing, of the Volkswagen not only tries to satisfy the Brazilian market, but also they export it to what? Neighboring countries. So for example, in that case, Bolivia would be considered what? Periphery. So core, semi-periphery, and periphery. Germany, Brazil, and what? Bolivia. That makes sense? I could have given the same example about what? About US. Like Ford and GM and everything. When I was growing up in Arizona, they started what? They started establishing assembly lines in Hermosillo, capital of what? Sonora, state of Mexico, which is exactly next door to what? South of what? South of Arizona. Okay. So what was happening? Core, US. Building all those things in Mexico, semi-periphery, exporting it to Central America, places like Guatemala and everything else. Why? Because Mexican labor is much cheaper, so that product could be what? More affordable, as opposed to American labor in Detroit making it, and the price would not be available for what? People in Central America. Okay, so beyond that one, what I wanted to say is these are new theories that have what? Marxist roots, of course. So word system, the major philosopher and scholars of it is Wallerstein. Is talking about capitalism as the word system, as your book is talking about. What I just told you, core, semi-periphery, and periphery, three different classes of states. Dependency theory focuses on the structure of the DC, not District of Columbia, developed countries, and LDC, less developed countries, another word for developing countries relationship. It talks about three eras of that: the colonial era, the financial industrial era, and the era of what? MNCs, multinational corporation. We're going to talk about these more in future. And then dependency leads into what? Underdevelopment according to those people. Okay, having said that one, the next notion is the intellectual, hegemony. Gramsci and others, they talk about this one. I thought this part of the chapter was very easy, written like a history, so I'm sure you can, comprehend it very well. Talks about coercion, consent, talks about intellectual hegemony and consent. That's very important. Consent useful versus what? Coercion, which is unnecessary. Is that right? If you can convince somebody to kind of follow your rules, why should you coerce them, force them or do something? That takes a lot more effort, and it creates also bad feelings, So here we go. Organic intellectuals, root in the what? In the poor ideas. Again, some ideas coming out from, Gramsci. And then society and ideas, important for what? For the struggle that all of these structures talk about, and for what? For economy. The next slide kind of brings all these things together in a way to the modern period and everything, and then a connection with other scholars. So structuralism and modern society. Max Weber, very famous sociologist or political sociologist, talking about religion importance in political economy, rationalization inherent in the capitalism, and efficient production. Georgi Rokas is talking about rationalization, lead workers not realize their interests. Joseph Schumpeter talks about, capitalism leading to socialism via rationalizing the trend that what erodes the risk takers. Is that right? And then the last major point here being what? It applies to what? Democracies as well. And last but not least, George Ritzer, and the whole McDonald case situation. So having said all of these and highlighting some of the main part, how can we conclude our discussion? Very simple. We can say that there are some points that you need to really remember about this, topic. One is structuralism relevant in the post-communist era? For all practical purposes, we still see aspect of it. Even though some states, they do not consider themselves formally communist. I mean, China still considers themselves communist, and then they have a communist Chinese Chinese Communist Party. Is that right? But guess what? It's basically state capitalism, which allows even private properties and this and that. Is that right? So it's a name, not what, not reality of it. Hobsbawm, talks about Marx was ahead of his time versus right now the condition he was talking about actually applies right now. This is another interesting, perspective. I'm not saying he's right, he's wrong. I'm just saying it's interesting. When somebody comes up with some ideas nobody else has said, it's always interesting. Is that right? Doesn't mean that they're always right, but you need to know. Okay. So reasons for the significance of the Marxism now. This could be again also a nice short answer. Is that right? I can ask you about that. And there are 3 reasons. Theoretical analysis of the capitalism is useful. Is that right? The collapse of the Soviet Union is not the collapse of Marxism, which we kind of talked about. And Grider's idea that in 80s and 90s globalization made these conditions actually really more relevant. Okay. And so in that regard we can say the factors to the globalization, elite and parties of the Davos in Switzerland, that they have every year. They have the Davos meeting and everything, and the leaders of many countries and the head of many of the major corporations, they go over there. It's very interesting to listen to them. Is that right? Now you might say, oh, Dr. Sadi, I don't have time for this one. Guess what? Listening to that one, it could help you to build a strategy in terms of you're young people. You're going to be working for the next 30, 40 years before you retire. Is that right? I know that my father's generation, they could retire after 20, 25 years. My generation really requires at least 30 years. Your generation, depending on what the situation is, you might have to take more than 30 years. You see what I mean? I know some of the faculty members here at UCF that have done much more than 30 years. Is that right? So be very careful about those things because they could give you hints in terms of how you could strategize yourself to get a better job and much better pay and less problem and everything else. Okay. And last but not least, the party of the Davos versus the party of what? Porto Alegre, and then that is Porto Alegre is a port city in Brazil and was gathering a lot of the developing countries and their perspective as opposed to, so this is like Davos, Switzerland, management, and these are like what? Workers. So you still see 2 different versions of how international political economy works according to what? Structuralists. All right. Having said that one, I hope that I try to keep this one as short as possible. It's not easy to talk about structuralism, Marxism, that, briefly, but I hope that you got something out of it. All right. And then if you have questions, as usual, what do? You email me. Thank you.